China's public security apparatus is allegedly extending its reach far beyond China's borders. In 2022, the Spanish NGO Safeguard Defenders published a report that says Beijing has built a global network of secret police stations overseas across dozens of countries in all 5 continents through Chinese initiatives like Operation Fox Hunt and Operation Skynet. Officially, these are often described as consular help or anti-corruption drives, but critics say that they are being used for surveillance, intimidation, and putting pressure on Chinese diaspora, communities, dissidents, and even foreign nationals. Here's a testimony from the Spanish report's main campaign advocate.
We came across the setup of at least 54 so-called overseas police service stations being set up by 2 provinces, in particular by security bureaus from those provinces in cooperation with the United Front Work Department. Now, we found accounts that at least some people have been hired to perform these duties. We also believe that they're building on an existing network of United Front Work organizations and associations. So it's really very hard to pin it down.
So is this alleged Chinese global network of secret police stations real? If so, what impact do they have on their host societies? And what countermeasures are host countries taking in response? Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Wenty Song. To explore these issues, I am joined by Yavo Kostadinov, Assistant Professor of International Affairs and Diplomacy at Minchuan University. And joining us from Vienna, Jürgen Kramp, a veteran journalist and former Der Spiegel bureau chief in Beijing, Singapore, and Vienna, also a visiting scholar at Soochow University Human Rights Center in Taiwan. Jürgen and Yavov, thank you both for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
But first, let's give the other side of the story a fair hearing. In spite of an increasing number of research in this area, the Chinese government has always denied the existence of these alleged secret police stations. Watch.
中国是法治国家，一贯严格遵守国际法，尊重各国的司法主权，不存在所谓的秘密警察战。
Yavov, let me start with you. How real do you think is this allegation about secret Chinese overseas police stations?
Now, the intelligence that China is gathering through those is beyond what China is actually claiming to be doing in those countries. And now, obviously, they started this with, as they say, to fight corruption and to bring criminals to justice. However, as a intended or unintended effect, they do have the opportunity to gather surveillance, to surveil and gather intelligence on local host countries, and also to do so. There is also documented, the report that you cited also documents about half of the 110 stations that they cite are actually at undisclosed locations and undercover. So obviously they can refute that or challenge those claims by the NGO, but there is compiling evidence by different NGOs that show otherwise.
Let me ask you, Jürgen, how do you look at this allegation about the so-called Chinese network of global secret police stations?
Yeah, good morning from Vienna. You know, when I saw the clip you just played, I'm always wondering how these Chinese spokesmen, how they can lie so bluntly without becoming red in their face. Because it's a lie we all know. The Chinese security apparatus are spreading their spies worldwide. In the last year, I was doing some research on how the intelligence services of People's Republic of China preparing war against Taiwan and the West. And the major cornerstone, or the major point in this war against the West is the Ministry of State Security and other state security institutions in mainland China, and their numbers are sky high. For example, the Ministry of State Security have about, always difficult to get numbers, about 500,000 to 800,000 agents. So they're in Germany, they're in Austria, they're in Hungary, they're in the United States, in France, they just closed it. Our security personnel just kept ignoring that for too long. But they are flooding the world with their agents and their spies, and we really have to be alarmed about it.
And Jürgen, just closer to where you are at the moment, we know that Germany next door has been one of the earlier, more vocal opinion leaders on investigating this issue. We know that Merix, for example, that German think tank that specializes in China, published a report back in 2017 called China's Global Law Enforcement Drag, which talked about some early signs of this. Can you maybe just share with us the German experience when it comes to observing and monitoring, perhaps combating this phenomenon?
Yes, it's almost shaming how lenient the German security apparatus are dealing with that. There was knowledge about it for a long time, and they always discuss it forward and backward without getting into action for now too long. And they're intimidating Chinese people who are not in line with their government, but they are also intimidating people who are against China. They are institutionalizing their legal framework to fight a legal war and a spy war and a cognitive war against Taiwan, but don't forget, even against the rest of the world. Xi Jinping is so obsessed becoming the leader of the world, and he thinks by instigating laws, which are just a scam, he can achieve that. And the problem is Western countries haven't seen that for a long time, and our government is not doing anything against it.
But how do you assess governments are going about doing it, and maybe also how, since this issue become much more prominent, getting more media exposure, do you see China changing their tactics at all?
I give you an anecdote from my time in the early 90s when I just have taken over the Spiegel office in Beijing. And it was my first holiday out of China. We stayed in a house of a Swiss diplomat in Switzerland at the end of a very remote valley. And the first morning we arrived, we were sitting on the balcony, and it was a dead-end road. And a car with the number plate, a diplomatic number plate from Bern, the capital of Switzerland, arrived. Out of the car came 4 clearly Chinese diplomats, and they started to filming us on the balcony having breakfast, my family and a family of a friend of mine. And then you didn't have smartphones or other surveillance equipment and what we have today. But anyhow, they took their cameras out and photographed us. On the first day we arrived there. And the same day or day later, I called a friend who was in charge of security in the German embassy in Beijing. Then I told him what happened to me and what does it mean? And he said, it's clear intimidation. They just want to tell you, we are here and we know everything what you're doing, and exactly that happens to every Chinese person who is against their government or who even criticized their government, or just talking about Taiwan and mainland China have different cultures or different roots.
Sounds like an uptick in scale, judging from what Jürgen has been saying. And I want to come back to you, Yavov, which is that can you tell us then about cases beyond Germany, for example, Central, Eastern Europe? How do you see the Chinese transnational policing issue is being experienced, perhaps discussed in those parts of the world?
So, again, there's no doubt that these police stations are real. Again, some of them are visible. China itself had a goal of 60 countries in 2014, and then now the report showed that there are about 53 countries that they're covering. These are all in the domain of intelligence. There's a lot of opaque information, so we always have to take it with a grain of salt. But in general, about half of them probably are undercover as well. And then how do local societies in Europe particularly respond to that? I would say that each country has its own policies, because the European Union does provide for flexibility. And then countries like Italy, for instance, where the most stations are situated, at least those that are the overt ones, then obviously the Draghi's government, for instance, said that it is no concern to them back then, right? So when they were establishing those stations. However, if you look at Ireland or Netherlands, they push back strongly on that, and they have asked formally China to not, have illegal police presence. Or the Netherlands at the beginning was a little bit more forthcoming for that.
If I may ask also, then what do you think explain this, I guess, different responses? Is it different kind of economic linkage with China, or different? What's happening?
It is obviously this is the basically each of these states, they do have sovereignty over how they deal with with their own relationship with China. For example, we have now 2 extradition agreements. One is Poland in Central Europe was the first, and then Slovakia as well, right? Mm-hmm. So these 2 countries have very broad, far-reaching agreements with Taiwan now for this. But that came also at the back foot of a precedent, right? In 2017, Liu versus Poland was a very famous case where Taiwanese citizen who was part of the scams, the telecom scams, and it was in Poland at the time. He flew from Spain to Poland, and then that person was then, launched a series of cases in Poland, lost the cases, and then went to the European Court of Human Rights, where he won the case as a precedent. So this is something that we need to factor here, that each of these countries had particular standing and relationship with Taiwan, but then they also, then can reach agreements with Taiwan.
I see. So in terms of bringing this back to how Europeans are managing this issue of transnational policing, do you see EU being able to serve as an effective coordination vehicle to come up with a European-wide response, or are there just too much diversity for something concerted?
I think it is a mix of both. You see, for instance, the Taiwanese justice minister was there and spoke with the version of Interpol, the European Eurojust, right? So they did that. And after that, there was also a couple of participation by a number of European countries that came here for the annual conference a couple of times. So there is this, what we call mix of structural efforts to engage with Taiwan, but there also, again, the differentiated efforts, we call them in Europe, right? So each country can differentiate and to decide for its own how to interact with particularly with Taiwan, right? So we see some Central European countries, as I mentioned, too, and now we have probably Czechia, Lithuania could be next to sign these kind of agreements because the relationships between Taiwan and these countries are a bit stronger now.
Okay, all right. So continue diversity amid unity, in a sense, for Europe. All right, so I want to take our attention to another part of the world, because similar patterns have also emerged across the Atlantic and in other democracies as well, where judicial actions and exposés increasingly bring spotlight to these extraterritorial Chinese operations. Let's look at North America. A little over a month ago, a Chinese-American Harry Wu, Lu Jianwang, began a high-profile trial for accusations that he took orders from Beijing to use a building in New York City's Chinatown as an unofficial Chinese police outpost. Here is him taking a question outside New York courthouse. Watch.
您的就是说陈金平就是说他认罪这件事情对您有什么这个案情有什么影响吗？您自己会感觉怎么样呢？
等我录制过来讲啊。
I want to come back to Jürgen, which is we've discussed how Europeans have been dealing with this issue of transnational policing by the Chinese state. How about Americans? How do you look at the American experience when it comes to how they experience, manage, or otherwise de-risk this issue?
I think we should follow the way our American friends signing or introducing to us, or which are they walking down the European secret services and the European institutions have been too lenient on all these overseas, so-called overseas police stations of the Chinese government. And we need a more stricter legal framework, but we also need a more stricter execution of our sovereignty towards these Chinese police stations in Europe. The problem is, and that's the major point, of course, they don't have a signboard at their door. Here's the Chinese police stations or overseas Chinese police station. They are operating out of institutions which are connected to the United Front, or they're working even in Chinese restaurants or Chinese export companies and so on. So it's difficult to indicate directly what they are doing, but as the facts are on the tables now, we really have to close that. Just take it the other way around. If the German government or any other European or even American government would open a police station in China, I mean, it would be a storm of Chinese citizens speaking out against it, not to mention the Chinese government. So it's cannot be tolerated that the Chinese government has functioning and working police stations on our soil, and it has to be closed.
How about you? How do you look at the American experience in terms of how U.S. may go about managing this issue of Chinese transnational policing?
I think that the covert operations go both ways here. But when it comes to what China is doing in the United States, I think they're particularly targeting dissidents, pro-democracy activists, and that might flee from China, and then so they try to intimidate them, arrest them, and make them disappear, obviously. But again, it is one of the problem nowadays is that we lack evidence to attribute quite often. Though legally there have been a lot of cases right now that are not directly linked to those police stations, but there were cases of co-optation and also illegal counterintelligence in the United States have discovered, and then they were forwarded to the courts in the United States. This is not only in the United States. Recently in Greece, for instance, last month there was a high-profile case of a rare commander who was co-opted via LinkedIn, right? On the couple weeks ago, actually, in June, end of June, also in Bulgaria, there was a Chinese spy for the first time discovered that works for, again, attribution here is very difficult, but for third country government. So these are cases that go to courts through the legislative, so they're indicative of the fact that we should not be just focusing on the police stations themselves, but other covert operations. In general, China has increased immensely the MSS, their operations, their approximate numbers of 800,000, 600 to 800,000, depending which source you're looking at, of how many operatives they have. Most of them work in China because China prefers to surveil their own country and to keep the social cohesion first before they extend abroad. But also other estimates say that about 5,000 of those are here in Taiwan, right? So,
5,000.
so yeah, roughly estimates would say that 10% of all foreign agents, then you have 50% military, and then about 40% would be Chinese people, random Chinese people, right? So, so these numbers, again, please take them with a grain of salt. They are, estimates, not hardcore evidence, right?
All right. So Yavor, on that question, though, you talk about how Taiwan has been, I guess, at the receiving end of a lot of these Chinese covert operations. Then what's Taiwan doing about it? How do you assess Taiwan's policy or maybe legislative responses so far? Are they effective?
I think some of it is very good, and that's why Taiwan has a lot to share with the international community, and it has been doing so, right? The GCTF and other forums exist where Taiwan shares how they discover some of those operations and what are they. For instance, I'll give you one example that was discovered by an NGO here in Taiwan. It's about the temples, right? A temple leader who then was recruited in Macau, and then she recruited other 10 people here who she identified them when they go to the temple that they had financial problems. Usually they prey, as any other great power would do, they prey on humans that have vulnerabilities or weaknesses, either need money or lustful people or these kind of people, and then based on that, they'll co-opt them. And since this person was the leader of a temple, she had access and knew in her constituency who were the military people or military-related people, and she co-opted 10 people, and then Taiwan managed to bust that whole covert operation. But in general, I believe that the resilience model of Taiwan is very good and should be followed by countries that might have problems, similar problems.
All right, that's Yavor's assessment. Relatively cautiously optimistic, let's say. Maybe underscore the optimistic part of the equation. How about you, Jürgen? How do you look at Taiwan experience in terms of managing China's United Front activity as well as covert operations? Has Taiwan response been largely effective, or are there still gaps that remain?
Yeah, let's first talk a little bit about the numbers. As I told initially, I'd done a research last year on a Taiwan fellowship on the Chinese apparatus and the intelligence services. And I think the correct number is that 180,000 people in China are working on this subject, what they call the so-called Taiwan question, which is not a Taiwan question, it's Taiwan, call it sovereignty or it's Taiwan's future or whatever. Anyhow, 180,000. And there are different estimates how many Chinese spies or agents of the United Front are already working in Taiwan. And the number of 5,000 is really farly outdated. There are different estimates which reach to up to 100,000. It's from Puma Shen, he thinks so high. I think it's somewhere in between. It must be around 20, 30,000. Agent sleeper cells are already installed in Taiwan. Of course, as there are sleeper cells and there's spies, and so we don't know exactly, and they don't have a number plate attached to them, but it must be far higher than 5,000.
And Jürgen, these are the problems, of course, but how do you look at Taiwan in terms of how Taiwan is going about providing solutions at combating the problems?
Actually, last year was a turning point with the famous speech of President Lai, where he said we have to address this issue, and the security services in Taiwan and the intelligence services in Taiwan are quite capable and how to tackle this attack from mainland China. And I think the Western security apparatus have to go into a closer cooperation with the Taiwan intelligence services, because they know in Taiwan they really know about the threat from mainland China, and in the Western countries we are a little bit vague or underestimate this problem. So yes, the Taiwanese are good, also because they have a very close cooperation with the American agencies, and in the future we need more cooperation with European intelligence services. That would help us a lot.
Thank you, Jürgen. Any final thoughts from you, Yavor?
I would also say that Taiwan is finding a really good balance in its resilience response, whole of society approach, to the extent that because there's a lot of concerns between how much we do and then there's a threat to human rights if you freedom of speech if you would restrict too much, right? Because of fear that there might be too many spies and you start being too invasive. So I just need to say that there are very smart people like Audrey Tang who advocates pre-banking and other concepts as to how Taiwan deals with that very effectively, right? Actually, my research right now is also focusing on Taiwan's resilience towards this kind of foreign interference. I'm using two cases to compare with the European countries, so hopefully my evidence will support the fact that Taiwan is at the forefront and other countries have a lot to learn from.
All right, we look forward to reading about your research when it's published. Thank you for that, Yavor.
Thank you.
All right, that's about all the time we have today, but I'd like to thank you, of course, Yavor and Jürgen, for your insight and for your time today. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right, that's our show. Thank you for tuning in. Please come check us out on YouTube. And until next time, it's good night from us from Taiwan.